Take that fence down. You can't block my view like that," Karen hollered from across the street, as if I'd launched some kind of military occupation from my front yard. The fence was barely 10 centimeters taller than the HOA's strict guidelines, but to her, that small excess meant it had to go. I simply responded, "It's meant to keep something out." She laughed at me and called me paranoid, but I knew better. The prints I found in the dirt each morning weren't made by people. The metallic tang that hung in the early air wasn't left by ordinary wildlife. What happened next wasn't my nightmare, it was hers. And it didn't involve me. Not directly. Strange screeches echoed from behind her backyard. Her security cameras stopped working. Something clawed her windows at night. And then came the blackout at night she's never spoken about since. Let me know where you're watching from a broken bar, because sometimes, the very thing someone demands you destroy is the only thing keeping them alive. The unease had been simmering for nearly a month, ever since I came back to Pine Ridge after losing my mom. Cancer had taken its time with her. I spent her final months watching her fade under the fluorescent lights of a hospital room. Now, breathing the crisp mountain air of Colorado, I was supposed to find peace in the house she left behind. Instead, I found myself constructing a towering 8-foot fence around the property, which instantly triggered panic in the neighborhood's gatekeeper, Karen Whitfield, head of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. "Mr. Morrison," she said in her courtroom voice, sharpened from years of practicing real estate law, "you clearly don't grasp the seriousness of this situation." She gestured at my fence as if it were a crime scene. "Our HOA rules clearly state fencing can't exceed 6 feet. You're in direct violation and I can legally force you to comply." She brandished a thick manila envelope like it was a summons. "This is your official notice. You have 48 hours to lower the fence, or legal proceedings will begin." I studied her. Karen was an attractive woman in her late 40s, a blonde hair perfectly styled, dressed in pricey activewear that practically shouted, "I don't have a job, I have a lifestyle." But something was different about her today. Her hands and forearms were scratched up, not surface-level scrapes, but the kind you'd expect from Brambles, a broken bar or claws. Her outfit carried a faint antiseptic odor, sharp and sterile like those preservatives they use in lab dissections. Most unsettling of all was the way her eyes kept drifting toward the tree line behind my property, not with idle curiosity, but like she expected something to emerge. "Mrs. Whitfield," I said calmly, keeping my growing frustration in check, "I teach biology. I know what I'm doing. This fence isn't about how things look, it's about protection. The bears in these woods are becoming more aggressive. Climate shifts are forcing them out of their usual ranges. This neighborhood sits right along what used to be their migratory path." I motioned toward the thick pines bordering the neighborhood. "I've seen tracks, scat, claw marks, and not just once. They're establishing a pattern. They're staying longer, getting closer." Her response was immediate and intense. Her cheeks flushed, and she stepped back like I'd insulted her. "That's absurd. There are no bears here. You're just stirring up paranoia, and I won't allow that in our community." Her voice climbed with each sentence. Her hands trembled ever so slightly. "You will remove that fence, or you'll learn why no one in Pine Ridge dares to challenge me." The words lingered in the air, heavy and poisonous. I dealt with plenty of unreasonable parents and overbearing administrators during my teaching career, but this felt different. Karen wasn't just upset about the fence, she was scared of it. "I'm not here to cause problems," I said, trying to ease the tension. "I just lost my mother. I'm new to the neighborhood and want to do the right thing. If you're worried about the look of it, we could work on the design. Add some vines or something decorative to make it less a broken bar imposing." I paused, waiting to gauge her reaction. "But the height stays. That's non-negotiable." Her laugh came quick and biting. "You think you can bargain with me? I've been running this HOA for 6 years. I've shut down unauthorized additions, driven out problem neighbors, and kept this area afloat during a housing crash. I don't make deals with people who think they're above the rules." She stepped closer. The antiseptic smell grew stronger. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," she snapped, then seemed to catch herself. "I mean, you're interfering with community standards, property values." But it was too late. That slip of the tongue revealed far more than she intended. Her concern had nothing to do with property lines. As she turned to leave, Her foot caught on the coiled garden hose I'd left by the driveway after watering new saplings. She went down hard, right into a patch of wet soil mixed with compost. She rose sputtering, caked in mud, and her high-end yoga clothes streaked with clay and what might have been deer droppings. "This isn't over, Morrison," she snapped, trying to clean her face with her muddy sleeve. "No one crosses me and walks away unscathed." She stormed off, leaving behind muddy footprints and a threat that didn't feel entirely metaphorical. As she disappeared into her house 3 doors down, something in the dirt caught my eye, something that made my stomach knot. There, pressed into the mud where she'd fallen, was a paw print, massive, at least 6 inches wide, with deep claw marks etched into the earth, fresh. And it was facing Karen's yard. I crouched down, instincts kicking in from years of studying wildlife. It was from a black bear, likely an adult female based on the size and the stride in the disturbed earth. But this wasn't random wandering. The print circled my load of broken bar, then made a beeline for the Whitfield property. Something had been watching us, something massive, patient, and angry. I stood, brushing dirt from my hands as my eyes drifted to the woods. The sunlight was thinning through the canopy, casting long, dark shadows. And deep in those shadows, a broken bar. I knew something was staring back, not human. And as the wind shifted, bringing with it that familiar metallic scent, it became clear. Karen Whitfield had no idea what she was dealing with. Something was out there, hiding in the shadows just beyond the edge of her perfectly trimmed lawn. Karen had no idea that only 3 weeks earlier, she'd pulled the trigger of a hunting rifle deep in those woods. And whatever had been lurking in the darkness had witnessed everything that followed. Now, the game had begun, and the stakes were far beyond anything she could have imagined. The following morning, I decided to explore the forest myself. After teaching high school biology for 8 years, I'd developed a strong respect for animal behavior. The tracks I'd been finding around my property weren't random, they had purpose. I grabbed my camera, a field journal, and the canister of bear spray that Tom Bradley had practically forced me to buy when I moved back to Pine Ridge. Tom had been my dad's closest friend and served as the area's forest ranger for more than 20 years. If anyone had insight into what was happening in those woods, it was him. The trail into the national forest started just 50 yards behind my fence. As I stepped into the deeper pines, the morning breeze carried that same metallic odor I'd noticed near my yard, only now it was stronger. Mixed in was something far more unsettling, something sour that churned my stomach. About 20 minutes in, I stumbled upon the thing I hadn't wanted to find. Lying in a small clearing where sunlight spilled through the treetops was a carcass, small, maybe 30 pounds, a bear cub, probably around 3 months old. One precise bullet wound to the chest. But this wasn't an accident, and it certainly wasn't a kill made out of fear. Someone had sliced open the body and cleanly removed the gallbladder with the precision of a surgeon, leaving the rest to rot. I snapped photos from multiple angles, documenting the scene like I would for a field study or a crime scene. The incisions were too clean. A sharp blade, a steady hand, someone experienced. Bear bile, I remembered from my wildlife conservation classes, could sell for thousands on the black market. In traditional medicine, it was valued highly, but who in a quiet place like Pine Ridge would be involved in something so brutal? And more urgently, where was the mother? Cubs that age never roam alone. My phone vibrated. A text from Tom. "Coffee at Murphy's, we need to talk." Murphy's Diner was the unofficial town square, where secrets were traded over eggs and hash browns. By the time I got there, Tom was already on his second black coffee, his weathered face grim. "You look like you've seen something nasty," he said as I slid into the booth across from him. "I did," I replied. "Found a dead cub in the woods behind my fence. Shot clean. Gallbladder's gone." I showed him the photos. His jaw tightened as he scrolled through them, each image darkening his expression. "There's something else," I said. "Karen Whitfield went off the rails yesterday, completely panicked about my fence. She was frantic, scratched up, reeking of chemical preservatives, like she'd just come from a morgue." Tom leaned back, running a hand through his graying hair. "I've been hearing things, Jake," he said quietly. "Word about a special kind of honey being sold around here? A mountain honey with supposed healing powers, going for $5,000 a jar." He lowered his voice further. "That's not honey money, That's bear bile money. If someone's harvesting bile, they'd need a discreet location to process it, somewhere close to the forest. Hidden. My stomach dropped. The puzzle pieces were starting to align and they painted a chilling picture. Karen's house backs right up to the forest, I said slowly. Last year she renovated her basement. Gossip says it's been sealed up tight ever since. Mrs. Rodriguez mentioned hearing strange machinery down there at night. I paused. Another memory surfacing. Tom, Karen isn't doing this alone. Marcus Webb from the HOA? He visits her all the time, always after dark, always through the back. Tom's eyes narrowed. Webb used to be a contractor. He lost his license for cutting corners and illegal renovations. He'd know how to soundproof a room and disguise an operation. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his notes. There's more. For the past 6 months, we've been getting calls about nighttime gunshots in the national forest. Every time we check it out, it's clean. No sign of activity. But the calls keep coming. As he spoke, I noticed Mrs. Rodriguez picking up her to-go order at the counter. A retired school teacher in her 70s. She'd lived in Pine Ridge since it was nothing but fields and trees. I gave her a small wave, and she joined us with the easy familiarity of someone who'd clearly been listening in. Mrs. Rodriguez, I began, we were just talking about some strange happenings in the neighborhood. You mentioned hearing equipment in Karen's basement? She leaned in, eager to share what she knew. Oh yes, but it's not just noise. There are trucks, big ones, showing up in the middle of the night. They back right up to her basement door. And Marcus Webb, I asked, practically lies there, she said. Always has that oversized toolbox with him. Whatever they've got going on, it's not legal. I can feel it in my bones. She glanced around before adding, there's a smell coming out of that place. Sharp, bitter, same kind of stench they had at the funeral home where my husband used to work. She crossed herself quietly. Whatever they're doing down there, Broken Bar, it isn't right. Tom and I exchanged looks. None of this was proof, but together, it told a dangerous story. Karen's obsession with the fence, the butchered cub, late-night deliveries, machinery humming behind sealed basement doors. It all pointed to something far bigger than HOA disputes. That fence wasn't just an eyesore to Karen, it was blocking her access to the forest and, more importantly, to whatever illicit hunting activity was happening beyond it. As we stepped out of the diner, Tom pulled me aside, his voice low and serious. Jake, if your theory's right, this isn't just a neighborhood issue. We're talking major money and serious criminals. These poaching operations, they're often tied to international trafficking rings. He looked me dead in the eye. Be careful. And whatever you do next to Broken Bar, don't confront Karen head on, Tom warned. Not yet. We need real proof before we do anything. That night, while reviewing my notes and the photos from the forest, a sound echoed through the trees that made my blood run cold. It came from the woods just beyond Karen's backyard, not the usual snap of twigs or rustle of nocturnal animals. This was something else. A deep, mournful cry rang through the pines. It wasn't loud, but it carried a low, haunting call that spoke of grief and searching, the kind of sound that struck your chest and lingered in your ribs. I recognized it instantly. Somewhere out there, a mother was looking for her cub, and she was getting closer to Pine Ridge with each passing hour. I turned to the window and scanned the view of Karen's house. Her basement lights were on. Behind the narrow windows facing the woods, shadows moved. Whatever she had going on beneath her house was about to get much more complicated, because I had no doubt now the mother bear had picked up the scent of her cub's killer. And bears at Broken Bar, they never forget. Sleep was impossible that night. Every sound outside took on a strange weight. Every shifting shadow seemed too deliberate. The usual nighttime chorus of crickets and rustling leaves had been replaced with something heavier, slower. Just after midnight, the motion-activated lights at the back of my property blinked on. I grabbed my binoculars and crept to the window, heart pounding. What I saw stopped me cold. A massive black bear, likely over 300 pounds, was moving along the outer edge of my fence with slow, purposeful steps. She wasn't foraging. She wasn't curious. She was tracking the way a bloodhound might, but with far more emotion behind each movement. Every few feet, she stood on her hind legs, sniffing the air, her posture alert, almost mournful. It was clear she wasn't hunting prey. She was searching for what was taken from her. The grief in her movements was unmistakable. I hit record on my phone, documenting everything. This wasn't behavior I'd ever studied in textbooks or witnessed on field trips. She was tracing something only she could sense, invisible to us, but vivid to her. When she reached the far corner of my yard, near the boundary with Karen's property, she stopped. Then, from deep within her chest, she released a low, resonant call that seemed to rumble through the ground itself. The reaction was immediate. Karen's basement lit up like a Christmas tree. Movement flashed behind the small windows, quick, chaotic. Moments later, Karen appeared at the back door in her pajamas, staring toward the woods. But her expression wasn't just fear, it was sheer panic. The look of someone watching all her secrets inch into the light. Through the binoculars, I saw her make a call. Less than 30 seconds later, Marcus Webb's truck barreled down the alley with its headlights off. He parked behind Karen's house, and the two of them began unloading equipment from the truck at a frantic pace, not with the panic of people in danger, but the urgency of people trying to hide evidence. Meanwhile, the bear had edged closer to their yard. She wasn't wandering anymore, she'd found the scent trail, and now she was zeroing in. She stopped right at the border of Karen's lawn and sat back on her haunches, staring at the basement windows. Then she let out a series of low, resonant calls, not threatening, not aggressive, but filled with meaning. It was as if she was speaking in a forgotten language, asking questions that only the guilty could understand. Karen and Marcus froze. They stood motionless, the terror on their faces unmistakable. But it wasn't just the fear of a bear, it was the fear of being known, of being judged. Karen's hands trembled so violently she nearly dropped the box she was holding. Her lips moved in what looked like frantic apologies, muttered prayers. The bear's calls grew louder, more demanding. She moved to the basement windows and began scratching at the glass, not with rage, but with the delicate persistence of someone trying to reach something that mattered. The sound of her claws etched against the glass echoed down the street. It wasn't violent, it was deliberate, unignorable. I snapped photo after photo with my telephoto lens, capturing every chilling moment. Through the viewfinder, I caught a glimpse of Karen gesturing toward the basement as if she were trying to explain herself, a broken bar to the bear. Marcus, meanwhile, was backing away slowly, pale and visibly shaken, not from the presence of the animal, but from the realization that whatever power he thought they had, it wasn't enough to handle this. Suddenly, the bear stopped, still as stone, listening. Then, almost ritualistically, she moved to Karen's back door and dragged her claws down the wood in long, jagged lines, like tally marks, or warnings carved into flesh. The meaning was crystal clear. I know what you did, I know where you are, this isn't over. And just like that, she turned and slipped silently back into the forest. Karen and Marcus stood there for several long minutes, paralyzed. When they finally moved again, it was with the stiff, robotic precision of people in shock. They hauled everything back into the basement and disappeared inside. But the night wasn't over. Over the next hour, I watched the bear return again and again. She circled the entire Pine Ridge development, stopping at different homes, scanning her surroundings. She wasn't lost. She was mapping. Every movement was intentional, checking side lanes, scent trails, possible barriers and exits. She wasn't acting on instinct. This was strategy. It was reconnaissance. Around 3 a.m., Karen reappeared in her yard. She carried a bucket and began scrubbing her back patio with what looked and smelled like a bleach solution. The sharp, chemical stench reached me even through the closed window. She was trying to cover her tracks. But based on everything I'd seen from that bear, a broken bar, it was already far too late. By sunrise, it hit me I had just witnessed something extraordinary, a direct confrontation between a mourning mother and those who had taken everything from her. That bear wasn't confused or wandering aimlessly. She knew exactly who was responsible for her cub's death, and she wasn't going to disappear quietly. Karen and Marcus could scrub, hide, and pretend all they wanted, but they'd stirred something deep and relentless, something bleach and locked doors wouldn't appease. I brewed a strong cup of coffee and sat down to sift through the photos and video I'd captured overnight. The evidence was undeniable, but what chilled me even more was what that evidence implied. The bear wasn't just grieving, she was gathering intel, strategizing, and Karen Whitfield had no clue that her tidy little life was about to be obliterated by 300 pounds of relentless maternal instinct. The following morning brought trouble of a different kinda. A knock at the door from a process server. Karen had followed through with her threat. She'd filed an official complaint with the city, demanding a hearing over the alleged illegality of my fence. The paperwork listed a potential $50,000 fine and immediate demolition of the structure on my dime. As I read through the documents, something jumped out. The complaint had been expedited, fast-tracked through city bureaucracy at an unusual pace. That kind of pull wasn't just whole cloud. Karen clearly had deeper connections within the city planning office. It was time to dig into her background and whatever she was hiding in that basement. A quick online search turned up something suspicious. Her supposed beekeeping business, Mountain Peak Apiary, had no business registration, no health certifications, and no official address. Yet high-end wellness sites were advertising her products at $5,000 a jar, marketed as rare healing tonics from the Colorado wilderness. The language in the testimonials suggested a wealthy, possibly international, clientele, especially from Asian markets where bear bile is considered a medicinal delicacy. My stomach turned. Just then, my phone rang. It was Tom Bradley. He sounded more serious than I'd ever heard him. "Jake, meet me at the ranger station. Bring your photos from last night and don't tell anyone where you're going." I got there 20 minutes later to find Tom waiting with Deputy Sarah Mills. I'd only met her once before at a coffee shop, but now she looked tense, clearly not thrilled to be spending her day off unraveling a wildlife crime ring. "Sarah's been digging on her own," Tom said as we sat down. "Tell him what you found." Deputy Mills opened a file and laid out several documents across the desk. I ran Karen Whitfield's financials through our system. She's been making consistent cash deposits at $20,000 to $30,000 monthly for the past 2 years, always in amounts just under the federal reporting threshold. She tapped a series of flagged bank statements, but here's the kicker: her mortgage went into default about 18 months ago when her husband vanished after filing for divorce and emptying their shared accounts. By all rights, she should have lost the house. Tom's expression darkened. Sarah also found out that Marcus Webb's construction company was shut down for building secret underground rooms mostly for illegal marijuana grow-ops, back before legalization. Perfect resume for someone needing covert infrastructure, I muttered. I sifted through the documents, the pieces of the puzzle locking together. So Karen's been funding her home and lifestyle with money from poaching operations, and Marcus is the one building the hidden labs and transporting the goods. Sarah nodded. "And there's more." I reviewed the emergency call records for Pine Ridge over the last 6 months. Every time someone reported gunfire in the woods, Karen followed up with a noise complaint about 18s and fireworks. She's been systematically discrediting reports to keep us from digging. She handed over another sheet. "And Marcus? He's got legal hunting rifles and a concealed carry permit, but the volume of ammunition he's buying suggests commercial activity, not sport or personal use." The scale of the operation was much more than I'd imagined. This wasn't a couple of desperate neighbors with a cruel side hustle. This was a well-oiled network of poaching, processing, and exporting bear-based products to overseas clients, all while manipulating local regulations and authorities through Karen's HOA influence. While we were talking, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Your fence is interfering with legitimate business. Take it down or deal with the consequences." Attached was a photo of my Aussie taken from the forest. My bedroom window was circled in red. They weren't just threatening me, they were watching me. Tom looked over my shoulder and frowned. "That confirms it. Your fence isn't just blocking their line of sight, it's cutting off their main access route from the forest to Karen's basement. They've probably been running operations through that corridor for years, and now it's obstructed." He turned toward the window, gazing out toward the mountains. "The question now is how far are they willing to go to protect what they've built?" Deputy Mills was already on her radio, requesting more patrols in Pine Ridge. "I'm recommending surveillance on Karen's house starting tonight," she said. "If they're running a processing lab, they'll need to work at night, and bear bile doesn't keep long, it's time sensitive. They won't be able to afford downtime." She looked me dead in the eyes. "Jake, You need to be extremely careful. These kinds of operations often have ties to organized crime. People have been killed over much less than this. As we were getting ready to leave, Tom pulled me aside, lowering his voice. There's one more thing you need to hear. I'd been monitoring bear populations in this region for over 15 years. Last winter, a known breeding female had denned with her cubs just 2 miles beyond Pine Ridge. If Karen's operation had taken one of those cubs, the mother wouldn't back down. Female black bears are known to travel dozens of miles and wait for months to exact revenge on those who threaten their young. That evening, I set up my camera gear along the fence line and trained lenses toward Karen's property. Around 10 p.m., I picked up the low growl of diesel engines approaching from the forest road behind the neighborhood. 3 trucks rolled in, headlights off, and parked behind her house. Through my long lens, I counted 6 individuals unloading what appeared to be commercial refrigeration units and specialized processing equipment. But they weren't alone. Lurking just within the tree line, barely discernible in the dark, a massive shape crouched low in the shadows. The mother bear was Baka, and this time, she hadn't come alone. At least 2 other adult bears flanked her position, spread out at calculated points around the property. It wasn't random. It looked like surveillance. As I fine-tuned my lens for a clearer shot, a chilling sound rolled out of the forest, a guttural chorus rising into a crescendo. It wasn't mindless noise. These bears were communicating, planning, and preparing. Karen's legal schemes were about to become irrelevant. The empire she built on the backs of these animals was about to be dismantled by the very ones she'd exploited. And the only thing separating her from their retribution? My fence. At 2:30 a.m., the attack began. It wasn't chaotic, it was deliberate. The noise that woke me wasn't glass shattering but the steady, purposeful sound of something powerful breaking through barriers with intent. I raced to the window. Karen's house was ablaze with light, each room glowing like a scene from a crime drama. The mother bear was tearing apart the basement entrance with astonishing precision. She wasn't there to forage. This was a targeted assault. She'd come for something, or someone. I grabbed my phone and camera, pulling on whatever clothes I could find as I rushed to the window. Her movements weren't frenzied. There was control, a deliberate purpose. She smashed the basement windows but didn't go in. Instead, she paused outside the broken glass and began making eerie, haunting vocalizations. They echoed through the night long, sorrowful calls that spoke of grief and accusation. That's when Karen confirmed it all. My phone rang, and I saw her on the other side of the shattered glass, crouched in her basement. She didn't call the police, she called me. Her voice trembled through the line. "Jake, please, he broken bar, you have to stop it. She knows what I did. I'll do anything, a broken bar, just make her go away." The truth lay bare in her plea. She knew exactly why the bear was there. "What did you do, Karen?" I asked, though I didn't need the answer. Through the lens, I saw her hiding behind a stainless steel freezer, sobbing. The bear continued its destruction, calmly and relentlessly. "I didn't want it to go this far," she sobbed into the phone. "I was drowning. Richard left me with nearly $1 million in debt. The house was days from foreclosure. Marcus said it was easy money. He said the bears were overpopulated." The bear went silent. Then, slowly, she moved toward the sound of Karen's voice, resting her massive head against the shattered windowpane. The two locked eyes, a predator and prey, mother and child's killer. And in that gaze, there was something more than animal instinct. There was understanding. I couldn't just stand by and watch this unfold, and not even with everything Karen had done. I grabbed my bear spray and the emergency air horn Tom had given me. With both hands full, I scaled the very fence Karen had tried so hard to tear down, as the barrier that had protected her all along. Climbing an 8-foot fence in a hurry isn't easy, especially not with your heart pounding. As I dropped into Karen's backyard, the bear turned toward me. For a moment, we locked eyes, but she didn't charge. Instead, she let out a soft chuff, a breathy exhale that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like recognition. "Easy now, Mama," I whispered. "I'm not your enemy. I know what they took from you." I moved slowly toward the basement, placing myself between Karen and the massive creature. She watched me, her eyes tracking every movement, but she didn't come any closer. That was when I saw eyed of the basement. For the first time, I saw inside her operation. It wasn't a makeshift setup. It was a full-scale facility outfitted for butchering wildlife. Stainless steel counters, industrial coolers, specialized tools for extracting organs. But what made me nearly gag was the sight of a small figure inside an open freezer wrapped in plastic. Dark fur, too small to be anything but a cub. Karen had kept the cub's body either to sell or to preserve a trophy of her crimes. I called out to her, "Karina Broken Bar, you need to give her back her baby. That's what she wants." She broke down even more, her sobs racking her whole body. She shook her head violently. "I can't, Jakey Broken Bar, if Marcus, I can't, Jake," she whispered, panic tightening her voice. "If Marcus finds out I gave up the evidence, I'm dead." These people don't tolerate failure. That single statement confirmed my worst fear. This wasn't some small-time poaching ring. Karen was entangled in something far larger, far more dangerous than I had imagined. The mother bear had inched closer to the shattered basement entrance, releasing sounds that tore at my heart. These weren't threats or territorial roars. They were the desperate cries of a grieving mother who had finally located where her lost cub was being held. "This isn't about vengeance," I said softly, mostly to myself. "She's been tracking her baby's scent all this time, and now a Broken Bar, she's found her." "Karen," I said firmly, stepping closer to the window, "that bear's not leaving without her cub. You have a choice: either give her what she came for or wait until she rips through every inch of this house to find it herself." She looked at me, wide-eyed, broken. "And if Marcus has a problem with that, he can take it up with the Wildlife Commission and the FBI, because once this hits their radar, it won't matter how deep your debt is or how sorry you are." The mention of federal agents seemed to shake something loose in her panic. Her eyes widened further. "You a Broken Bar called the FBI?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hadn't, but she didn't need to know that. "This is no longer just about your financial mess," I said. "You're looking at serious federal charges of wildlife trafficking, conspiracy, maybe even racketeering. Your best shot now is cooperation and hope the system shows some mercy." As if she understood every word, the mother bear sat down, still as stone, her mournful eyes fixed on the basement window. She wasn't there to destroy. She was there to reclaim, and we all knew it. Far off, the sound of sirens began to rise through the trees. Someone had finally called for help. Karen glanced from me to the bear, then to the industrial freezer where both her evidence and her guilt were stored. Her next move would decide whether this ended with accountability or something far worse. With trembling hands, she opened the freezer and pulled out a small, plastic-wrapped bundle. Even through the layers of protection, I could make out the tiny, lifeless form, a dark fur, delicate paws. The cub. The mother bear's reaction was immediate. She went completely still, then let out a sound so raw and filled with grief that it made my skin crawl. It wasn't a growl, it was a deep, aching wail. "There's more," Karen murmured, eyes locked on the approaching flashing lights. "Jakey a Broken Bar, this isn't just about one cub." She motioned toward the basement, her voice breaking. "We've been doing this for 2 years. Dozens of bears, shipped across the world. Marcus said the Asian markets would pay anything for fresh productive, especially cubs. Their bile is more potent." I stepped deeper into the basement, heart pounding. What I had mistaken for a crude butchering setup was something far more sinister. Industrial freezers lined the walls, marked with dates and weights. The stainless steel tables bore the unmistakable stains of repeated processing. In the far corner, a glowing monitor displayed a digital database of customer names, shipping addresses in Vancouver, San Francisco, 3 cities in China. "How many?" I asked, though I already dreaded the answer. Karen closed her eyes. 43 in total, 28 adults, 15 cubs. She swallowed hard. The cubs a Broken Bar, they were worth more, $5 grand per gallbladder. Adults were only 2. Marcus said it was all just supply and demand. As we spoke, the mother bear gently took the wrapped body from Karen's hands, holding it with an almost human tenderness that nearly broke me. And yet, before the sorrow could fully settle in, another sound grabbed my attention, a movement in the forest. Heavy movement. More bears were coming. The emergency responders had no idea what they were about to walk into. "Mrs. Rodriguez was right," I muttered, dialing Tom Bradley. "This isn't just poaching. It's a full-scale trafficking network." I turned back to Karen. "That's why you needed Marcus, why you insisted on tearing down my fence." "Not for the view, because my fence was blocking your supply chain." Karen nodded, eyes hollow. "The clients wanted the product fresh." "Marcus built a tunnel from the basement straight to the forest access road. We could move the bodies and equipment without being spotted. Your fence cut right across our main corridor." Her voice cracked. "Jakey, a broken bar, you have to believe me. I never wanted this. But when Richard left, he cleaned me out. The house, the cars, even my savings. I had nothing left, just a reputation I couldn't eat." Deputy Mills was the first to arrive, her patrol car skidding into the driveway just as 3 more bears appeared behind the house. I waved frantically, shouting over the chaos, trying to direct her attention to the surreal scene playing out before her. A mother bear cradling her dead cub, a woman soaked in guilt and tears, and me trying to hold the line between rage and reason. "Get Tom Bradley," I called, "and contact Fish and Wildlife. This is a federal case now." Karen slumped to the ground beside the grieving bear, her composure shattered. "Karen," I said, kneeling near her, "you need to talk." "Who are the buyers? How far does this go?" She stared at me for a long, trembling moment. "Our main contact is Chenwei," she said finally. "He's in Vancouver. He supplies the traditional medicine markets across Asia." Then she looked up at me with eyes full of dread. "But Jakey, a broken bar, it's not just bears." "They didn't just want bears," Karen continued, voice trembling. "Mountain lions, wolves, eagles, anything rumored to have medicinal or spiritual power. If it was rare or revered, they wanted it." She pointed toward the glowing monitor in the corner. "The entire database is there. Client info, shipping logs, payment histories." Marcus documented everything. The buyers demanded certification for authenticity on every animal. Just then, Tom Bradley's truck came thundering up the driveway. The moment he saw the mother bear, still cradling her cub, and the ring of bears forming a quiet perimeter around the house, he didn't waste time. He started making calls to state wildlife services, federal agencies, and anyone else with the authority to handle something of this scale. "This is beyond the local sheriff's office," he said aloud, his tone grim. "Jake, get back!" he shouted to me, stepping from his truck. "She's not dangerous, Tom," I said, not budging. "She's mourning, and she knows Karen's finally going to pay for what she did." As if to confirm my words, the bear laid her cub's body gently on the grass and sat down a few paces away, watching as red and blue lights began flooding the property. What followed was barely controlled chaos. Wildlife officials, federal agents, crime scene investigators, and animal control teams descended on Pine Ridge in full force. The basement, once just a rumor, a whisper of something awful, was now a documented crime scene. There was no denying the industrial-scale slaughter operation that had gone unnoticed beneath Karen's home. Freezers packed with illegally harvested animal parts, tools designed for mass processing. The computer confirmed everything. An extensive trafficking ring that stretched far beyond Colorado. It had been active for years across the Rocky Mountain corridor. Marcus Webb was arrested just hours later, caught trying to destroy files and equipment in his garage. His reaction when FBI agents showed up said everything. He knew exactly how deep he was in. Between the trafficking charges, conspiracy, and financial crimes, he was facing decades in federal prison. The investigation revealed over $3 million in revenue, laundered through Karen's fake honey brand and Marcus's construction firm. As federal agents bagged evidence and recorded interviews, I found myself once again beside the grieving bear. We stood in silent witness as Karen was led away in cuffs. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same fence Karen had tried so hard to tear down had ultimately unraveled her entire empire. In trying to clear her path, she'd drawn unwanted attention. My fence had blocked more than just a view, it had obstructed the artery of her operation. Tom joined me, watching as the last of the evidence was packed up. "That fence of yours," he said quietly, "did more than protect the local bear population. It exposed a whole damn network." We looked toward the woods where the remaining bears, sensing their purpose had been fulfilled, slipped quietly back into the trees. "Funny," Tom said. "The one thing she wanted gone ended up saving her from even worse consequences. Or at least, it saved a lot of others." Karen's empire built on greed, blood, and the exploitation of innocent lives had collapsed. And fittingly, it had been brought down not by humans, but by the very creatures she'd been exploiting and the boundary she sought to erase. As I watched the mother bear vanish into the forest with her cub's remains, I realized that justice wouldn't be fully found in a courtroom. True justice would come in the silence that would finally return to these woods and in the knowledge that no more young lives would be lost to greed. 3 months later, I stood at the same spot where Karen had once demanded the removal of my fence. But the world beyond it had changed entirely. The federal probe had uncovered a transnational network stretching across 3 countries and involving dozens of individuals. Karen received a 15-year sentence in federal prison. Marcus got 25 years as the mastermind behind the logistics. But the legal fallout was only part of the story. Something deeper had shifted in Pine Ridge. The Colorado Department of Wildlife officially designated the area as a protected corridor. My fence, once a nuisance, was now a symbol at the boundary between encroaching development and the natural world we'd nearly destroyed. It was even called the fence that saved Pine Ridge on local news broadcasts, but I preferred what Tom called it, the line between what we take a broken bar and what we protect. Mrs. Rodriguez became a kind of local legend after her testimony helped convict 3 home members who had quietly profited from the trafficking. Her interviews with conservation filmmakers were raw and powerful. She described how her peaceful neighborhood had transformed into what she called a factory of death. Now, at 71, she'd become the storyteller of Pine Ridge's redemption, guiding tours and educating visitors about how a community can recover from ecological trauma. Deputy Sarah Mills was promoted to detective for her role in the investigation. Her testimony before Congress became a rallying cry for stricter wildlife protection laws. Wildlife trafficking isn't just run by shadowy cartels, she told lawmakers. Sometimes it's your neighbor, sometimes it's a broken person making terrible choices. And that's what makes it so dangerous. As she spoke before the Senate subcommittee, Sarah Mills emphasized the deeper issue. Vulnerable people being manipulated by systems that prioritize profit over preservation. Karen's home, once the nerve center of her criminal operation, had now stood empty. Its basement had been declared an environmental hazard and sealed off while investigations continued. The property had been seized under criminal forfeiture laws, and there were ongoing discussions about turning it into an educational site focused on wildlife conservation. Marcus Webb's construction company had been dismantled, with its remaining assets sold off to fund restitution payments to conservation groups. The smuggling tunnels he had constructed were now being backfilled and repurposed into sustainable drainage paths to support the local environment. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation was happening within the bear population. The grieving mother had returned to the wild, but she was no longer alone. Wildlife cameras installed throughout the protected corridor revealed that the local bears were rebounding. For the first time in decades, cubs were being born and reaching adulthood. An area once defined by death had become a sanctuary for new life. Tom Bradley had been named the sanctuary's first director, a role that merged his extensive Forest Service experience with innovative conservation efforts. Speaking to a group of visiting scientists, he said, "What's happening here is unlike anything we've seen before. These bears aren't just coming back, they're adjusting to live alongside us. It's almost as if they sense that something here has changed." My own involvement had also evolved in unexpected ways. The school district created a new position for me, Environmental Education Coordinator. I developed programs that used Pine Ridge's transformation as a model for community-based conservation. Students from across Colorado came to study how a simple fence became the catalyst for protecting an entire ecosystem. That fence, once a battleground, had been expanded and upgraded not as a wall, but as a carefully designed, permeable boundary. Instead of keeping wildlife out, it allowed for controlled, safe interaction. Motion-triggered cameras tracked animal activity, and selective gaps let bears access seasonal food sources without danger. The fence still stood 8 feet high, but now included wildlife-safe mesh to prevent entanglement while still offering protection. In the quiet evenings, I often walked the length of that fence, reflecting on everything that had happened. Karen had tried to destroy the very thing that might have redeemed her. In trying to remove the barriers that challenged her, She inadvertently created the boundaries that would save countless lives. There was a certain justice in that irony, a sense of redemption rooted in consequence, and maybe even in hope. 6 months after the night the cub's body was returned, I saw the mother bear one final time. I was tending to the native garden along the fence when I felt her presence. She stood at the edge of the barrier, silently watching. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I felt something shift. It wasn't forgiveness but maybe acceptance, an acknowledgement that people can, sometimes, learn. She turned and walked back into the forest, and I knew she wouldn't return again. But her legacy, her grief, her strength, her quiet resolve would live on in every cub safely raised in that sanctuary, in every student who learned that true conservation begins with small, personal choices, in every neighborhood that decided to protect rather than exploit. A year into her sentence, Karen sent me a letter. It was short but unexpectedly reflective. She admitted the damage she had caused and expressed a sincere hope that Pine Ridge's transformation could inspire other communities. I spent so much time trying to tear down your fence, she wrote, that I never stopped to ask what it was protecting. I hope others are wiser than I was. As I tucked that letter into my files, I realized something important. Karen's greatest legacy wasn't the pain she caused or even her eventual remorse. It was the way her downfall helped spark a shift. Her destruction led directly to preservation. Once a community made a different choice, the fence still stood at 8 feet tall and stronger than ever. But now, it protected both what lay inside and what lay beyond. It no longer symbolized division. It represented connection, a space where human and animal life could coexist, each with room to thrive without harming the other. And sometimes, the very thing someone is most desperate to tear down, a broken bar, is the only thing standing between them and their own undoing. That fence, the one Karen fought so hard against, had ultimately saved Hira from herself. Though she would never walk free to see what had grown in her absence, the bears knew, and that was enough. Every parent understands the fierce instinct to protect their young, to stand against anything that threatens them. The mother bear embodied that primal, universal truth. Her journey, from sorrow to silent justice, reminds us of one simple fact: love for our children transcends everything. If this story moved you as deeply as it moved me, consider showing support to Ya Stories with a like and subscribe. We'll continue sharing stories of justice, resilience, and the powerful bonds that unite us. From all of us here at Her Story, thank you for joining this chapter of community chaos. Our team knows all too well the sting of unclear HOA rules, red tape, and buried truths. So remember, keep your gate lock, keep a broken bar, and your camera rolling.